Now, Mr. President, I also wish to address another subject, the subject of religious liberty. Congress is convening for the second session of the 114th Congress at a moment in time rich with significance for religious freedoms. January 6th, for example, marked the 75th anniversary of President Franklin Roosevelt's famous Four Freedoms speech. During the depths of World War II, President Roosevelt used his 1941 State of the Union address to describe a world founded on what he called four essential human freedoms. One of these is the, quote, freedom of every person to worship God in his own way, unquote. At the end of the week on January 16th is Religious Freedom Day. It commemorates the 230th anniversary of the Virginia General Assembly's enactment of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. Thomas Jefferson authored the legislation, and after he left to serve as U.S. Minister to France, his colleague James Madison secured its enactment. Of his many accomplishments, and Jefferson had a lot of accomplishments, Jefferson directed the three of what he called, quote, things that he had given the people, unquote, he listed on his tombstone. One of them was the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which laid the foundation for the protection of religious freedom in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Mr. President, last fall I delivered a series of 8 speeches here on the Senate floor presenting the story of religious freedom. I explained why religious freedom itself is uniquely important and requires special protection. At no time in world history has religious freedom been such an integral part of a nation's character as it is here in the United States. The story of religious freedom includes understanding both its status and its substance. The status of religious freedom can be summarized as both inalienable and preeminent. As James Madison put it, religious freedom is, quote, precedent, both in order of time and in degree of obligation to the claims of civil society, unquote. Madison also explained that religious freedom is the freely chosen manner of discharging the duty an individual believes he or she owes to God. As we have affirmed so many times in statutes, declarations, and treaties, it includes both belief and behavior in public and in private, individually and collectively. Tonight, President Obama delivers his final State of the Union address. According to the Washington Post this morning, President Obama will speak about unity, about coming together as one American family. Until very recently, religious freedom was such a unifying priority. Last month, I described to my colleagues the unifying statement about religious freedom called the Williamsburg Charter. Published in 1988, it brought together presidents and other leaders of both political parties, the heads of business and labor, universities and bar associations, and diverse communities to endorse the first principles of religious freedom. The Charter boldly proclaims that religious freedom is an inalienable right that is, quote, premised upon the inviolable dignity of the human person. It is the foundation of and is integrally related to all other rights and freedoms secured by the Constitution, unquote. It asserts that the chief menace to religious freedom is the expanding power of government, especially government control over personal behavior and the institutions of society. And the Charter also declares that limiting religious freedom, quote, is allowable only where the state has borne a heavy burden of proof that the limitation is justified, not by any ordinary public interest, but by supreme public necessity, and that no less restrictive alternative to limitation exists, unquote. Now, Congress made these principles law 5 years later by almost unanimously enacting the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, an act that I had a great deal to do with. One way to know the value of something is by the effort made to protect it. In RFRA, government may burden the exercise of religion only if it is the least restrictive means of furthering a compelling governmental purpose. That is the toughest standard found anywhere in American law. By this statute, we declared that religious freedom is fundamental. It is more important than other values or priorities, and government must properly accommodate it. The Coalition for the Free Exercise of Religion, supporting RFRA, was the most diverse grassroots effort I have ever seen in all of my years in the United States Senate. 5 years after RFRA, Congress unanimously enacted the International Religious Freedom Act. 21 senators serving today, 12 Republicans and 9 Democrats, voted for it. So did Vice President Joe Biden and Secretary of State John Kerry when they served here. That law declares that religious freedom, quote, undergirds the very origin and existence of the United States, unquote. It calls religious freedom a universal human right, a pillar of our nation, and a fundamental freedom. Now that is what unity looks like. With a presidency no less than any other aspect of life, however, actions speak louder than words. And while President Obama has paid lip service to religious freedom, as I assume he will in his annual Religious Freedom Day proclamation this week, the actions of his administration tell a different story. In 2011, the Obama administration argued to the Supreme Court that the First Amendment provides no special protection for churches, even in choosing their own ministers. The court unanimously rejected that bizarre theory. The administration ignored religious freedom and RFRA altogether when developing the Affordable Care Act and its implementing regulations. When religious employers argued that the administration's birth control mandate did not adequately accommodate their religious freedom, the administration fought them all the way to the Supreme Court. The court again rejected the administration's attempt to restrict religious freedom. Yesterday, 32 members of the Senate and 175 members of the House of Representatives filed a legal brief with the Supreme Court supporting religious organizations that are again arguing that the Obama administration's birth control mandate violates the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I want to thank my friend from Oklahoma, Senator Lankford, for working with me on this important project. I know that religious freedom was important to him when he served in the House, and he is already a leader on this critical issue here in the Senate, and I'm pleased to see him in the chair here today. This mandate requires religious organizations to violate their deeply held religious beliefs or pay crushing monetary fines. The plaintiffs in these cases, including Christian colleges, Catholic dioceses, and many organizations that minister to the elderly and disadvantaged as part of their religious mission. They want to provide health insurance for their employees and students in a manner that is consistent with their religious beliefs. The Obama administration, however, is working hard to make those religious groups knuckle under to its political agenda. It provides blanket exceptions for churches that do not object to the birth control mandate, but denies exemption to religious employers that do object. The administration exempts for-profit companies employing more than 44 million workers, including some of America's largest corporations, even if they have no objection to the mandate. Yet it is fighting to force compliance by religious nonprofit organizations that do object to the mandate on the basis of deeply held religious belief. Not only is that policy simply irrational, but it treats religious freedom as optional. Here's how I put it last month. Subjugating religious beliefs to government decrees is not the price of citizenship. To the contrary, respecting and honoring the fundamental rights of all Americans is the price our government pays to enjoy the continued consent of the American people. If that is true, then religious freedom must be properly respected and accommodated. And I believe it's true. Religious freedom should be a primary consideration, not an afterthought. Religious freedom should be given the accommodation that a preeminent right requires, rather than begrudgingly given the least attention politically possible. If our leaders wish to abandon the religious freedom that undergirds America's origin and existence, they should say so. If members of Congress now reject what they once supported and insist that religious freedom is less important than the political preferences of the moment, they should make that case. If the Obama administration wants to repudiate treaties we have ratified asserting that religious freedom is a fundamental human right, the president should be upfront about it. As with many things that happen in the twilight of a presidency, I expect to hear much in the State of the Union address tonight that speaks to President Obama's legacy. What will he be remembered for? What great principles or causes will be associated with the Obama presidency? Part of President Roosevelt's legacy is that State of the Union address 75 years ago, in which affirmed that practicing one's faith is an essential human freedom. What a tragedy to have President Obama be remembered for hostility to, rather than protection of, religious freedom. In the coming days, I will be presenting to each of my Senate colleagues the collection of speeches on religious freedom that I offered here last fall. I hope that they will encourage us in Congress, as well as our fellow citizens, to unite in our commitment to this fundamental right. Mr. President, this is important stuff. And even though we may agree or disagree with certain religious beliefs, they still ought to have the right to believe them. They still ought to have the right to worship the way they want to. The fact of the matter is that's what's made America the greatest country in the world, bar none. And I don't want to see it destroyed because we are doing everything we can to undermine religious freedom in this country. I refuse to allow that to happen, and I hope my colleagues will take this seriously as well. I know a number of them do, including the current chairperson. I just want everybody to know that as long as I'm here, I'm going to be fighting for religious freedom, and I hope that all of us will also. God bless America, and I yield the floor. In fact, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.